SeatGeek is the easiest way to find the best deals on tickets to pretty much any live event. Concerts, sports, theater, comedy, whatever you want. Download the SeatGeek app today and enter promo code SEATS to save $20 on your first purchase.
Hey, greetings and welcome into another episode of Sports Beat Kansas City, the sports podcast from the Kansas City Star. I'm Rustin Dodd, the Royals beat writer, down here at the general managers meetings in Orlando, Florida, and have a special guest on the show today. We've chatted with, we're kind of going down the list of noted Royals observers slash scholars. We've talked to Bob Dutton this offseason, we've talked to Sam Mellinger, and now I've got on the line Rany Jazayerli of Rany. I'm gonna list your bio or your resume, I suppose, and I probably won't even mention your day job as a dermatologist, but I will. Let's go down the line. Baseball Perspectives, Rob in the Rany on the Royals.com, Grantland.com. Have you written pieces for The Ringer, I suppose?
I have, most recently for The Ringer. When I write, that's where I write now, but I'm mostly inactive.
What did I miss on the CV?
I've written for ESPN.com before Grantland.
Okay.
And assorted freelance work elsewhere, but mostly my own blog, Rany on the Royals, which I ran from 2008 until they won the World Series, and I thought that was the perfect time to sign off.
Okay, well, we're going to chat a little bit about the Royals offseason and where this team is going and kind of the paths they're going to take. But, Rany, I wanted to ask you one quick question because you did get your start at Baseball Prospectus, and in the Houston Astros recently won the World Series with a few Baseball Prospectus alums in their front office. And I feel like we've kind of gotten to the point where every single World Series champion is in some sort of validation of analytics, and I'm not sure if that says something about how widespread they're in use now and across baseball, or maybe it just says something about if you're going to win a World Series, you have to be pretty smart, and you're going to be using some sort of statistical analysis in doing that. But what the Houston Astros, are they a validation for analytics in your opinion?
Oh, I would say absolutely. I mean, this is the third year in a row that the world champion employed a former Baseball Prospectus person. In fact, the Royals with Mike Gruppen were actually the first team. That's a trivia question I would not thought the answer to being the Royals, but the first team to win with a Baseball Prospectus alumnus was the Royals. But then the Chicago Cubs had Jason Parks in their scouting department, and then the Astros this year. But the Astros have three, like you mentioned. Like Kevin Goldstein is a good friend of mine, their pro scouting director, and then Mike Fast and Colin Wires, who are two of the really smart analytics stat guys at BP, are both in that front office. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to say you can't win without a BP alumnus, although that certainly seems to help, but you can't win without analytics in the same way you can't win without scouts. I mean, you're not going to see a team win without a scouting department. You're not going to see a team win without an analytics department anymore because every single team in baseball has an analytics department. I think, to me, the war was finally over after the Cubs won last year because obviously what Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer had done with the Red Sox way back in 2004 was really the first huge victory for analytics. Theo at that time was barely 30 years old, and he'd been with the team for 2 years and had no scouting experience, and did something nobody had done in 86 years. But to do it in Chicago, proving that it wasn't a fluke the first time around, and to do it in a complete rebuild, unlike in Boston where he inherited a good team. But at the same time the Cubs were winning, the last sort of holdouts against analytics, the three teams that really stood out were the Twins, the Phillies, and the Diamondbacks. All had front offices that were openly sort of disdainful of analytics. All three of those front offices had been fired in the year before the Cubs won the World Series, and now all three teams have analytics-savvy front offices. So to me, sort of the war is over. It's not that analytics is the only way to win, but in order to win, you need as much information, as much expertise as you can get. And analytics is a huge part of that. And like I said, you can't win without scouts, but you can't win without analytics. You need both. The best teams are the ones that really meld them together in the best way possible, frequently by having a general manager at the top who has experience both in the scouting world and in analytics. You think of Jeff Lunau in Houston, got his start running, the scouting department with the Cardinals, but is a very, very analytics savvy guy who hired all of those people from a baseball perspective. So I think that the teams that use the best of both worlds and are able to combine that knowledge, impart it to the players, do things like putting on defensive shifts, getting players to buy in to some of what the data says, are the teams that are the most successful. And I think the Astros, it's the third year in a row now that I think I can point to a team and say they use analytics to very, very good effect to win a championship.
Yeah, I was going to mention this at the end. A little bit of news today. The Royals actually lost their analytics director, or one of them, kind of their head of their department, or at least right now, Mike Grootman, who's been with the Royals for about 10 years or so. And so he's going to the Brewers to work in international scouting, a little bit of a different type change of a job, although I think he's trying to diversify his skill set a little bit. But I was chatting with Dayton Moore today about that and kind of what he was looking for in terms of restructuring that department or filling those roles. And they've got more, like, this is something I wish I would have written about more at this point, but they have probably 6 to 8 kind of full-time analytics guys on staff right now. But anyway, but Dayton, his point today was that he would like to see the Royals be more invested in like research and development side of the analytics. Obviously the stat side is part of that, I think. But is that does that sound like a useful move going forward? I mean, I guess we've seen like places like the Dodgers who basically have like an in-house think tank coming up with stuff. But the kind of the research side and those type of things, is that a useful tool for an analytics department in 2017?
I think it is. I think the problem with answering that question for people like you and I is we don't have access to the inner workings of what teams are doing. And I mean, the Royals in general, one of the big impediments I would think for you to write stuff about stuff like this is the Royals tend to keep teams very close to the vest, as you know. It's not that they don't use analytics, but they are very, I don't want to use the word secretive, but that might be the best fit, secretive about what they're doing in order to maintain a competitive advantage, which all power to them. If, in pursuit of winning, if you need to be secretive, then that's great. It may be frustrating for people like you and I who want to know what they're doing, but I'm convinced they are doing things. They have access to information that we don't know about. But teams in general now, so much of the most groundbreaking research that's being done is being done in-house by teams that are keeping it proprietary. They're not releasing it, to the public. And as I've been doing this for over 20 years. It's such a weird feeling to know that, we were on the sort of the cutting edge of baseball analysis 20 and 15 and maybe even 10 years ago, because there was really nobody doing this in-house for major league teams. And over the last 10 years, not only do teams they've basically hired some of the best analysts from places like Baseball Prospectus to do this work, but they have access to data now that we don't even have access to in the public domain. Nobody in the public domain has access to. We get tastes of things like spin rates and launch angles and the StatCast data, but that's just a little bit of the taste. You talk about the defensive evaluations that teams have, the data from where fielders are positioned to how quick they move, on first contact of the ball, the routes they're taking. StatCast we'll get a little bit of that information when you watch highlights on MLB Network, but just a tiny bit of it. And then, of course, the stuff we're never seeing is a lot of the minor league stuff. I know teams, the Royals have had, a lot of the evaluation machines and the cameras and all that set up in their minor league parks for years, and I think most teams do now. And I think when you talk about when Dayton talks about research and development, I wonder if what they're talking about there is evaluating minor league players, and not only just evaluating what they're doing now, but is there a way for them to determine which players have coachable skills, which players can be sort of improved based on the data they've got. This player has a hole in his swing. You can hit, fastballs up and in, whatever. They can use that information to then go and work with that player and improve his skill set. I think that's the sort of stuff that they're talking about, which is a melding, again, of scouting and analytics, where you take the data to find holes in a player's skill set, and then you use the scouts and you use your player development department to go out there and improve the weaknesses of a player. But I'm just speculating, and I don't think we'll ever know because the teams don't want us to know.
Sure. Okay, let's get into some discussion about this Royals offseason. The Dade Moore spoke today at the GM meetings, which are kind of a precursor to the winter meetings, where there's not a lot of action, but there is a lot of discussion and talk about what is going to happen. And Dade today kind of reiterated what he has said previously this offseason, which is that the Royals are going to pursue some of their homegrown free agents, Eric Hosmer, Mike Moustakas, maybe less so Lorenzo Cain, although they haven't said that on the record, but just from an age perspective and how that might fit into the window moving forward, he might be less of a priority. But he also said today that, it might be more of a challenge than people kind of realize from the outside, essentially saying kind of the obvious statement that there are numbers and there are places where, in terms of salaries and payroll, where the Royals just can't get to. And if Eric Hosmer is offered a certain contract, the Royals are just not going to be able to match it. But we were discussing offline too. This is sort of the fulcrum for the Royals offseason. I think if they sign or are able to sign Eric Hosmer, if his market comes back to a reasonable place, if the Royals value him more than about any other team in baseball, I think they could re-sign him, and then that would maybe put a lot of other scenarios in play with whether they try to contend next year or what they look like. But I do think that they're not able to sign Eric Hosmer, the likely scenarios that they tear it down, and we can get into what a tear down, what the definition of that might look like. But I just wonder from your perspective, not necessarily what the Royals are going to do, because it's almost impossible to say here in the early weeks of November, but what do you think the Royals should do? I mean, what does the ideal offseason look like? Is it Eric Hosmer having a press conference at Kauffman Stadium in a few weeks or in a month or two and re-signing for 7 years and $150 million, or is it potentially blowing it up and rebuilding from the ground up and trying to rebuild in the same manner that they did a decade ago? What say you, Rany?
Well, like a lot of Royals decisions over the last 20 years, I feel like the answer as to what they should do is a battle between my heart and my head. And my head, but the natural pessimism, or maybe some people would call it realism, of my head usually proved right over the optimism of my heart up until about the moment they traded Will Myers away. And from that moment until they won the World Series, everything that my heart could possibly have expected or asked for came true. And then over the last 2 years, I feel like we've gone kind of back to a more realistic scenario where some of the Royals' decisions, some of their free agent signings have been, they have not panned out the way your heart might hope, but more the way rational analysis would lead you to believe. So I have no idea what they should do. I'll tell you the two positions, right, is that my heart said, yeah, but, Eric Hosmer is going to be 28 years old. He's one of the youngest free agents on the market. He's the kind of talent he has. He's not a unathletic kind of brawny slugger who might hit 30 and fall apart. He's the kind of beautiful swing, hits to all fields, very athletic at first base, the kind of guy you think would age really well. And yeah, he's never had a season quite like he had in 2017, but what he did in 2017 is what we've kind of all been waiting for since his rookie year. He finally put it all together. There's good reason to think he can maintain that performance. He was, a well above average player. And, at $20 million a year, that guy's somebody you can still build around. You can give him 7 years and know that he's still going to be a good player in 5 or 6 years. And I get that. I get that optimism. Obviously he won a World Series at the World. So the same reason that, I was, absolutely thrilled when they re-signed Alex Gordon. I would be, part of me would be absolutely thrilled if they brought back Eric Hosmer and get to watch this guy for another half decade or more. But the more I look at this rationally, the more I don't see a likely path for the Royals to win, to make the playoffs for at least the next 2 to 3 years. And I just worry, even a guy like Hosmer, you really want to pay him $20 million or more for the next 3 years in the hopes that 3 years from now, he's still going to be good enough. He's still going to be worth the money to lead to lead the next great Royals team. Especially when you're looking at a farm system that is still one of the worst in baseball. The Royals did not have a top 100 prospect last year on Baseball America's top 100 prospect list, and they're probably not going to have one. They've got good prospects. They just don't have any great ones. It's a sort of farm system where their top 10. If their top 10 were their number 5 through number 14, it would actually be a pretty decent farm system. They're just missing the elite guys at the top. Hosmer, are they going to bring back Hosmer and Moustakas? Well, if they can afford both of them, great, but you're still looking at a team that's going to lose Lorenzo Cain. And Lorenzo Cain, analytically speaking, has been their best player. He was the best player last year. He's probably been their best player overall over the last 3 or 4 years because he provides the same offense you've gotten from Hosmer and Moustakas in terms of overall value, but with the defense and speed and the positional value of being a center fielder. So I just feel like you take a team that couldn't get to go above 500 the last 2 years, and frankly was lucky to be 80 and 82 this year because they were outscored by 90 runs. You take out their best player, maybe their 2 best players if you only bring back Hosmer, and there isn't a lot of talent coming through the pipeline. I don't see how this team wins the next 2 to 3 years. The Indians look very good. The Twins have already kind of done their rebuilding process, and the White Sox are doing. Have sort of. I feel like the White Sox are almost the blueprint for what the Royals could do, in that they finally decided to rebuild, and they turned around and traded not just guys who are at the end of contracts, but guys in the prime of their contracts. Chris Sale, going to Boston and getting a couple of top 100 prospects. Jose Quintana, who was still under contract for a couple of years, and getting Eloy Jimenez. And suddenly the White Sox now, to me, look like a team that could be a force to be reckoned with in the next 2 years or so. So I don't see a path here until at least 2020, probably 21 or 2022. And so anybody you sign now is going to be a long shot for them to still be contributing 4 or 5 years from now. So my brain, with every fiber of my sort of rational, analytic, cold, robotic thought process says you've got to blow this up and start over. The problem, of course, is that involves trading guys. Not just not re-signing guys.
That's what I kind of want to get into next.
How do you do this? How do you do this and not cause a justifiable fan riot? I mean, you're not going to trade Salvador Perez. I just don't see. I don't care how robotic and cold my thought process is. I cannot see how you can get away with trading a guy like Salvador Perez.
I do think that there is a scenario where this is where I think the Royals are, when they talk about the market coming back to them, I do think there's a number out there where you're not necessarily playing, I don't necessarily think you're trying to serve 2 masters, but I think there is a scenario where you could realistically sign Eric Hosmer to I don't know what the numbers are, is it 6 for 140 or 6 for 120, I should say, or something in the closer to an average annual value of $20 million per year. And I don't know that would get it done necessarily. In fact, I don't think it would. But let's say in that scenario, you could bring him back. I do think you could potentially, if you had him for long enough, you could think that maybe, okay, we'll turn this thing around in 2 to 3 years. But it is right, because on the one hand, I think, do you assign Eric Hosmer and then turn around and deal Danny Duffy? That doesn't seem like it would make much sense. So I suppose you got to figure out if you're all in or all out. And this is something I kind of want to write about in the next couple days, or at least in the next week or two. And I spoke with Rick Hahn, the White Sox GM, about this today, and I asked him about trading Chris Sale, and the questions that they asked themselves, and the kind of the checklist they went down in terms of fans and season tickets and all those considerations that you have to beyond the baseball deal. And I wonder, though, it's like, and he said by the end it made too much sense, and they actually surprised themselves by how much fans in Chicago like that. But Chris Sale did not help the White Sox win a World Series
exactly
3 years ago, and I just don't know how you trade Salvador Perez or even how you trade Danny Duffy this offseason. Although the more you think about it, and the more you think about where the Royals farm system is right now, as you said, they don't have the top guys. Well, how do you get the top guys? Well, maybe if you traded Danny Duffy with 4 years of club control, and you traded Salvador Perez with, I believe, does he have another 5 years left on his deal? I think he's through 2022 if you count all the options. 2024? Like.
I'm looking it up now. 4 years. 2021.
2021. Okay. So that's how you could potentially acquire a couple of premium prospects in order to kind of kickstart this rebuild. And I wonder if you're going to embrace losing for a couple of years, maybe go all the way. I think as valuable as Salvador Perez would be over the next 2 seasons, can you count on him being that same valuable piece in 2020 or 2021? And I think it's a question that the Royals are going to have to ask themselves this offseason as they get deeper. But obviously, I think first they're going to exercise all options in trying to retain some of these guys. But I do think I just think it's a question that they're going to have to kind of reckon with as they get into December.
Yeah, I mean, this to me, this is the tax you pay on winning a title, because your fan base, everybody becomes emotionally vested in those players, and it's very difficult, not just from an analytics standpoint, but just from a human standpoint, to trade guys away who were instrumental in winning a championship for you, even if it's the right thing, for the team. Bill Belichick would do this.
Yeah.
Maybe Billy Dean. But Dick Moore is not, for better or for worse, he's not one of those guys. And I don't think the Royals want him to be. I don't think Royals fans want him to be cold and calculating like that. And I think, even if it may be the best thing for them, but I think fans. You said what Ron was saying, like fans were surprisingly okay with it. I think any baseball fan that actually has followed baseball here the last few years would have trouble getting too upset with a team that implemented a plan to build for the future. Even I wouldn't call it necessarily tanking, but if a team was honest and straightforward about what they're trying to do. I mean, just point to the Houston Astros and how can anybody say this doesn't work?
I think that's a good point, and I think there's one part where that doesn't totally bear itself out, that argument, and that is in the season ticket holders and in the stands. I mean, I think there's a cost to be paid to be really. There's
a short-term hit, absolutely. The Astros were getting 0.0 rating, and actually this is something hasn't come up a lot, but may be one of the reasons why they're not trying to go this route is they have a very large television contract that they're probably in the process of renegotiating that I think expires in 2 years.
Yeah, it's after the 2019 season, I believe, is the last year.
So 2 years from now. Right.
So that's a good question too. Although it's a good point, I should say. But you talk to some people, and they will tell you that obviously having a good team on the field and having great ratings is good for negotiations, and it's good for getting other bidders involved in the process, I think, to potentially drive up the cost of what those television rights would be. But I'm not sure that. I mean, I think the prime factor for the Royals getting a big contract is how many people live in Kansas City and how many television sets the games are going to reach. And I'm just not sure that it's not going to change over the next 2 to 3 years. And I'm not sure that losing 95 games 2 years in a row, sure, you'd like to have that television contract be up right after the 2015 season, but I'm not totally sold that if they lose for the next 2 years, that's going to kill their negotiating leverage.
Well, I think they've certainly, if nothing else, what happened in 2014, 2015, the ratings that they got showed what this market is capable of, that despite the low raw numbers in terms of the sheer number of television sets in the Kansas City area, the percentage of those sets turned to Royals baseball is one of the highest, in the major leagues, and probably will be as long as they have a good team on the field. So I agree. Any negotiating TV partner that is purely looks at what happened in the past, one season, doesn't look at a long-term trend, is probably not doing their job anyway. But I think that at the same time, until that contract is resolved, that kind of uncertainty may prevent them from going full bore. But here's let me throw a scenario at you here. Like the kind of, you talk about threading the needle here, trying to do both at the same time. Let's just say Salvador Perez is sort of off limits. They're not going to. He's going to be the guy. He's going to be the face of the franchise while they do this, right? And maybe what they do, they even start playing him, half the time or a third of the time at first base, just to kind of keep his knees healthy, so maybe he'll have the longevity that down the road, when they are ready to win again, he's still capable of catching. Kind of what the Giants do with Buster Posey to keep him fresh. Salvador, I can see the argument that you can't really trade him, but I'm not sure there's anybody else on the team that you can't trade because of their connection to the World Chip. And Danny Duffy had a very minor role on both pennant-winning teams. Duffy is the guy. If you're going to rebuild, he's the guy that you can put out there. I talked about what the White Sox did with Chris Sale and Jose Quintana. I think Duffy slots right in between those guys in terms of quality. He's a number 2 starter, not an ace, but certainly there's ace upside there. Under contract for 4 years. You look at what the White Sox got for Sale and Quintana. I think Duffy could bring you back a similar return somewhere in between, a top 20 prospect and maybe another top 100 prospect right there. But then the other thing you look at, there are other guys on this roster that you wouldn't think of maybe as trade bait. But I actually think if you're going to do this, the next guy on the list, strange as this may sound to me, would be Whit Merrifield.
Yeah, I think.
Merrifield, 4 more years of club control. You're thinking, well, just barely finished his rookie season last year, but he's already 28 years old. He's old. Is he going to be good in 4 years when he's 32, or can you get something for him now when he's established himself as an above-average second baseman in the prime of his career and has 4 years? And he's not only does he have 4 or I think 5 years actually of club control left, but isn't even arbitration eligible for another year or two. So very inexpensive. That's a guy that maybe you can turn into, some top prospects.
I had the similar conversation with a sort of a pro scout with another team, and I think with Whit, I think it's a great point. I think he does have some sort of value. I think the team that you have to deal him to has to really buy into the analytics and has to really buy into the numbers and has to sort of disregard his past as a non-prospect and his and sort of the total package. Somebody has to really buy in. I do think that might decrease his value a little bit on the market, even with the years of club control. I think there's so little downside. There's almost zero downside to acquiring him right now with his contract status, and so that I think that does bump up his value a little bit. But I do think that reputations die hard in baseball, and I do think that and maybe this is changing, and maybe there's enough teams.
Well, I was going to say the
out.
reason I think it might be changing. I was going to say is you just think about the sheer number of players who have reworked their swing. They're sort of what we call the swing playing guys have just taken their game to a level that previously was thought impossible and then maintained it. Everyone from J.D. Martinez to Daniel Murphy to Justin Turner and Chris Taylor with the Dodgers. It's really kind of remarkable these last couple of years what we've seen with a player. Merrifield was unusual in that he was in the minor leagues in this half, right? So he didn't really have a established track record as a average, thoroughly average major league player. I think of average major leaguer. Daniel Murphy was sort of a poster child for that for 5 years. And then, it's sometime in it wasn't even between 1 year and the next. It was late August, started hitting for power, and then was an absolute, almost single-handedly won the NLDS and NLCS for the Mets before the Royals shut him down in the World Series, and has been a dominator ever since. I feel like we're seeing this more and more now. This is one of those things where I almost feel like the teams have data, have information that is allowing them to go to players and say, look, make this change and you can unlock, something inside you that you don't even know is there. And it's legit. I mean, the guys who do this, every time we see a guy do this, we think, oh, well, it's a fluke. He won't do it the next year. And he keeps doing it. I mean, Justin Turner did it, didn't have a lot of respect for it, got, a very fair 4-year contract from the Dodgers, and that looked like a huge steal because no one was completely bought into what he had done before he was a free agent. And, he's built on that. So I'm wondering, teams might look at Merrifield and be like, he's one of those guys where the light bulb just went on, he changed his approach to the plate, and suddenly he's, what you're seeing now is the player he is, and you can completely throw out the 4 or 5 years of as a mediocre minor leaguer before that.
I think there's certainly some truth to that, and I think it's a good argument. I do think some of those guys, whether it's Chris Taylor or Justin Turner, just the pedigree of the minor leagues, and I'm not even sure I totally agree with this sentiment, but I just know how baseball teams tend to operate, and I'm more making the argument that I'm not sure that Whit Merrifield's value is as high on the market as it should be based on how valuable a player he's been for the last season and a half, and how cheap his contract is, and the club control.
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing is that, if anything, I almost wonder if this allows the Royals, like the one advantage of considering the strategy is they actually don't have to implement this like right now in the winter. Like everybody we think about here that they would want to trade, Danny Duffy, like I said, Duffy, good pitcher, but if you think he's going to, every year he kind of leaves you wanting a little bit more, and he's had trouble staying healthy. Like if he goes out and starts the year, just on fire for 2 months, his trade value.
No, terrible. I mean, yeah.
If Merrifield goes out and does it again, if Merrifield's has another Merrifield, the same offensive numbers he has this year, next year through June, that his value, I think at that point he's for real. Teams think will evaluate him accordingly. The other guy I would consider Scott Alexander.
Yeah, well, he's a guy that don't deal him this offseason. Deal him next July if you're gonna.
Right, exactly.
If you could
trade him. Sorry, I was going to say you could trade him, and you could have Joakim Soria and Kelvin Herrera. Like all three of those. The Royals could basically rule the reliever market next year because if those guys are healthy, Soria and Herrera at the end of their contracts, Alexander with tons of club control. But I feel like the Royals can almost, they don't have to make the decision to go into the full rebuild now. They can wait till mid-season next year because none of these guys are going to lose a lot of value because they've lost half a season of club control. If anything, they'll gain value if they legitimize what they've already done on the field and improve that they weren't a fluke.
I think that's right. I think, and I'm going to make the counter argument to just what I said, because I said I don't think what Merrifield has as much value as you might think just based on his statistical profile. But I think he's a guy that maybe you move in the offseason just because I think the Royals made a mistake last offseason in the way they did this, but they traded a reliever in the offseason, and they held on to their position players. And what did we see happen? Well, the position player market at the trade deadline was almost non-existent
right.
Because teams have a 25-man roster, and they have things that are set. But everybody obviously needs relievers and starting pitchers as they set their pitching staffs for the postseason. And I just think there's probably more value Kelvin Herrera and Scott Alexander next July, and Danny Duffy if he has a great first half, and there's a lot of value there. But I do think there might be maybe Whit Merrifield's the only position player that the Royals have to deal right now that has some value. But he's a guy I think you could deal in the offseason. I guess Salvador Perez is in that too. But saying he's off limits. I think there is some value in dealing your position players in the offseason and looking for the best deal, because who's to say, although Whit Merrifield is a versatile player and he can play a lot of places, but who's to say teams would really be valuing him, that highly, at the trade deadline, and who's going to be in contention and all that. So But
that's a fair point, especially now that teams like more and more are carrying 13, 12 or even 13 pitchers. Like there's so few bench spots that it's just hard to integrate a position player onto your team unless you have a very specific need,
or an
for
injury,
a very specific position, right? And to trade a guy like Merrifield, it's not a 1 season, it's not a 2-month rental. You're looking at a long-term solution. That's the sort of thing where it's hard to fill. Hard to find a team that has an exact need, not just in the short term, but in the long term, and is contending in July. Whereas a reliever, like you said, every team can use an additional reliever or additional starting pitcher, and can sort of fit that person into their long term plans as well. So that's an interesting point.
This is just a kind of a small pet peeve of mine, because I thought about this a lot last summer as the Royals traded Wade Davis for Jorge Soler in the offseason, and you could just talk about that deal for 10 or 15 minutes, but my larger point was that they traded Wade Davis in the offseason. How valuable would he have been in, I guess he would have been a half-season rental, and it wouldn't have been significant. Maybe the value is not much higher than what they got, but and then in hindsight they went for it, so you can't necessarily knock them for this, but what do they get for even 1 year of Lorenzo Cain? Deal him in the offseason.
Right.
Obviously, you're not going to win if you deal him, and maybe that makes it more difficult. But I don't know. I guess they did deal Gerard Dyson, and I think that was the right move, and they got something valuable back. But I tend to think that deal position players in the offseason, deal relievers at the trade deadline, and that's you'll come out ahead in the end. So, okay, Rany, let's wrap up here, because I want to let you go, and I'm going to get back to a little bit of work before we call it a night here in Orlando. We've talked a little bit about the offseason and the path that the Royals are going to go. So maybe just put you on the spot. I don't think I'll hold you to this, but where, if you had your crystal ball right now, where do you think Eric Hosmer, Lorenzo Cain, Mike Moustakas, and I guess you can even add Alcides Escobar in there if you'd like, although you don't necessarily have to guess him. But where do you think they will be playing baseball in 2018?
Where do I think they will? It's funny. If you'd asked me 2 months ago, are any of the big three, let's keep Escobar out for a second, are coming back, I would have said absolutely no way. But I'm starting to get those sort of early Alex Gordon vibes with Hosmer, where it's like it's not that teams don't have interest, but I don't sense that there's the one team out there that has the financial wherewithal to make Hosmer the kind of offer that would just blow the Royals out of the market. And I get the sense that, though, as much as Hosmer is respected as a very good player throughout the game, there is concerns about the fact that he's very wildly erratic from one season to the next. He's never really strung two really good seasons together, and really prior to last year, he never had a season that met his potential, and that no team sort of values him the way the Royals have. I feel like even when he wasn't hitting, the Royals have always been enamored with him, not just for his hitting talent, but and not just his defense, but his personality, his clubhouse presence, everything he brings to the team, the clubhouse community. And if the Royals value, even with the Royals' limited payroll abilities, if they value him as much as they claim to, I think if they're willing to pay Alex Gordon $18 million a year for at the age that he was, here's Hosmer, who's I think 4 years younger. I can see. I think they'd be willing to pay him $20 million, maybe $21 million. It's a matter of how long that contract goes, and it just takes a willingness to go if at least 6 years and maybe 7. If he gets an offer of $8 and $200 somewhere, he's gone. I just don't get the impression that's going to happen now, and I get the impression the Royals will find a way to make it work if they can do 7 and 140, maybe even 7 and 150 if it's backloaded. And I would say right now I'm 50-50 that he might be back. I don't think Moustakas will be back, in part because I think Hosmer's the guy that they want first, and I don't think they're going to make any other decisions until there's resolution from Hosmer himself on where he's going to go. But if I guess I'd put a higher percentage of Hosmer comes back to Kansas City than anywhere else. Kane, I would see. I think of a really, smart team with a lot of money. I could see him with the Cubs. I guess I could throw him there. I mean, I think about what they loved when they lost Dexter Fowler last year and kind of faked it a little bit in center. They have Albert Almora, who they love, but the Kyle Schwarber experiment in left field was kind of a disaster. I could see them moving Schwarber, moving Almora, maybe even moving Kane to left field, and having a great defensive outfield. I'll put Kane in Chicago. I'm just throwing darts now, of course. Moustakas, I could see, maybe reunion in L.A. and he goes to Anaheim and plays for the Angels. The Angels they just re-signed Justin Upton, and I think they want to rebuild that offense and give themselves a chance to win with Mike Trout before he's a free agent. So I would guess Moustakas to Anaheim. And Escobar, I hope it's not the Royals, because I just feel like the rumors of Raul Mondesi moving to center field so they can play Escobar for another year or two just seems so silly. You don't move the 22-year-old phenom guy who could be your shortstop for 6 years to a different position just so that the current not such a great hitting 30 or 31-year-old hitting 31-year-old shortstop gets to play there another year or two. So I would hope I could see him going to a rebuilding team that just wants to have some defensive stability in its infield. I think I saw a rumor the Padres might be interested. I could see a team like that that'll give him a chance to play every day, because I think we've learned one thing from Alcides Escobar. He really likes to play every single day, and I do mean every single day. So I think he's going to value a place that gets him the opportunity to play every day, even if it's maybe a rebuilding team.
Okay, Rany, I'm going to give you my thoughts on the big three, but before I do have kind of a weird question. What kind of deal would Alcides Escobar have to get from the Royals? Like, how small would that deal be for you to say, like, fist pump and say, like, oh, that's a great deal? Like, are we like
fist pump? There literally isn't a dollar value I would fist pump, because even if you were free, my concern is he taking playing time away?
That's very true. I know, but what if
one would have to be
1 year for $1.5 million? Would you be?
It would have to be a value where it's like, if they use him in a utility role, he's the valuable guy to have. Like $2 million or less, I'd be like, okay, if they're going to use him as a utility guy and he plays short, but he also plays third or second, it doesn't play every day at short, and they give Mondesi a chance to break in, I can see that having value. But he's a weird guy, because it's not like he's a sort of guy where if he's not playing every day, how much value does he have? Because his bat at this point is so weak that even if he can play a good defensive third base or second base or whatever, if his bat is as weak as it's been the past year, he's that guy. That's somebody you can start part time. So I there's nothing that's going to make me excited. But
what if he offered to pay $2 million to play for the shortstop?
and he was released on opening day. Yeah, I'd be for that. That's a good deal. No, it's not. Look, I mean, it's awkward, because the heart part of me wants to never say a bad word about the guy. I mean, great trivia answer. In Royals history, George Brett has the most postseason hits of anybody. Alcides Escobar second. Right? I mean, he hit 311 in his playoff career. He was good at the exact moment the Royals needed him to be good at the plate, and bad pretty much all the other time. So I have no ill will towards him at all, and I think if he leaves now, he'll be remembered very fondly in the by fans for a very long time. I just feel like where the Royals are headed, playing time for him is more of an impediment than pushing them in the right direction.
Okay.
And I don't see him accepting a utility role. I guess thinking about Yunieski Betancourt the second time around, when they signed him to be a utility player, and apparently nobody told him, and it turned into kind of a problem, and he got released mid-season. I would hate to see that kind of an ending for Alcides.
Sure. Okay, I will put it this way with the big three. I think all of yours were realistic. I think the one guy that I'm watching this offseason to dictate Eric Hosmer's potential return to Kansas City, or just his free agency at large, is J.D. Martinez. I feel like very much, and then I wasn't covering the team at the time, so I may have this incorrect. But I believe that the key move for Alex Gordon coming back to the Royals after the 2015 season was the Chicago Cubs signing Jason Hayward.
Yes.
And,
so you're thinking, where do you think Martinez signing would help the Royals?
I think the Boston Red Sox are interested in a middle of the order bat, somebody that can anchor their lineup and give them a little bit of power and something to put around all their other pieces.
Because Hosmer, I think, would fit there, and I could see if he's going to sign elsewhere, Boston is one of the top.
I think if you're looking for the best fit in terms of a big market that can give him the kind of contract he wants, he can give him opportunity to win. He'll have a chance to win there, and they obviously need a first baseman. He could hit balls over.
And the Green Monster.
Yeah, the Green Monster.
He hit like 40 doubles just at home. It would be.
So I think that is the most logical fit for him if you're looking for a team that could blow the Royals out of the water in terms of a bidding war. But I do wonder if the Red Sox get more fixated with J.D. Martinez and believe he's a better fit, if they sign him, they're not as interested in Hosmer. I'm not sure what the market looks like in that sort of situation, and I feel like that's the sort of situation where it could come back to where the Royals are players. I kind of agree with you. I think Mike Moustakas is destined to sign with the Los Angeles Angels. And Lorenzo Cain, I don't have a good feel for that one, but I do like your idea of the Cubs, and I tend to think that there's going to be a lot of suitors for Lorenzo Cain. He's a very good player, obviously, but he can also play multiple positions. He can move to a corner in a few years if you really are worried about the age with him, and still probably be an above-average right fielder with some solid offensive skills. So, but I kind of tend to think that he goes to the highest bidder, which is kind of an obvious statement when we were talking about free agency, but I also mean that from a fact that I think Lorenzo Cain is not necessarily, I'm not trying to say he's materialistic or anything like that. I'm just saying he's wise to the fact that this is his, although this, I guess it's true for Moustakas.
Older than the other two, right?
Yeah, it's true for Moustakas and Hosmer as well, but I'm just saying that he understands this is his one time to go to free agency and cash in at the height of his
he's not going to get
value.
a second elite contract, whereas those guys could.
Yes.
I agree.
And so I tend to see him in San Francisco. I just feel like that's a place that wants to compete again and could overpay.
Absolutely.
It could overpay for him, so that might be my guess for him. The other interesting scenario, and I was thinking about this, maybe I should run it by somebody that knows more about this than I do, but how about this sort of scenario? The market does not materialize for Eric Hosmer, and the Royals offer him, 6 for $120 or something like that. Let's say it's $20 million a year, but in addition to that, they say, okay, we'll also give you an opt-out after the second year of the
which
the deal.
I hate, but yes,
yeah.
I have a feeling the problem I have here with him resigning is if he gets that opt-out, he might get the opt-out at the exact moment they actually need him. Like I said,
that's true.
They give him for 3 years. He plays well. The team isn't very good. They're about to contend, and then suddenly they either have to pony up a lot more or they lose him. So,
but it just feels like if the market is not there, the Royals would be that kind of team that would say, okay, yeah, we'll sign you and we'll give you the opt-out that maybe making him even really want to come back.
And I feel like they've given opt-out. Like I look at the opt-out they gave to Ian Kennedy. They gave an opt-out to a pitcher they probably didn't need to give an opt-out to. A 5-year deal to a pitcher you probably shouldn't have to give somebody an opt-out. And they did, and I just worry that. And Scott Boras is the master of getting those opt-outs and maximizing his client's leverage. I have a feeling any contract that Hosmer signs, almost anywhere, is likely to have it. But if he comes back to the Royals, there's going to be that 3-year opt-out. And basically what it is, it's a 3-year contract with a player option. And he's going to hold all the leverage in the world in 3 years. If you're not expecting to win the next 3 years, is that really a wise move if you're the Kansas City Royals? You're taking on all the risk. If he falls, if he goes back to, not hitting for power, hitting too many ground balls, you're stuck with a really expensive player who's not that good. And if he does play well, you're going to have to find a way to keep him when you're actually trying to win in 3 years.
It's a very good point. I don't disagree, but it is something that I think could play a factor. Is if his market does come back to where the Royals could potentially be a player, that's I think something to keep in mind. So, Rany, I appreciate the time as always. I will let you get back to your family and your normal Monday night.
Always good talking to you, Rustin.
For sure, and we'll have to do it again sometime. But everybody out there, thank you for listening to Sports Beat KC. Thank you to Rany for joining us, and hopefully we will be back soon. We might even have another, hopefully a guest coming soon, a former player from the lost generation of Royals. Hopefully we're working on it, so I don't want to promise too much right now, but we might have somebody coming on soon. So stay tuned for that, and we will be back soon with more episodes chatting about the Royals and their offseason. So, Rany, thanks again, and we will see you soon.